The media is hungry for information as Winston Peters grabs lunch, but still no decision on a coalition deal. We're live for the very latest.
Kia ora, good evening. Things are moving right now at Parliament. Speculation mounting that Winston Peters is about to announce who'll form the next government.
It comes 26 days after the election. Our political team is across minute-by-minute developments with all the major players involved in discussions. We begin with political editor Corin Dan. The wait continues, Corin.
Yes, an extraordinary, tense and dramatic afternoon here at Parliament. Now, we are expecting Winston Peters. He's still locked in a meeting in his offices at the moment, but it's not far from where I am right now. You should see him in the not-too-distant future walking past me down there, heading to the Beehive Theatre where he is expected to give some sort of a media statement. But look, it's been an extraordinary afternoon because we do not know which way he is going. There's been plenty of rumours, there's been some leaks, there's been reports. Some would suggest that it's looking more likely for Labour, but really we are a long way away from trying to figure out what exactly is going on at the moment. It is unclear, uncertain. Have a listen to Winston Peters from earlier today. This was about midday. He went out to get some lunch, and at that point he still had not made a decision.
It's seriously difficult because, you know, there are pros and cons for every part of this decision we've got to make, and we've got one more chance to evaluate what it means both ways.
Is it because there are two good deals on the table? Is it a hard choice to make because you've been offered a lot?
Depends what your perspective is. Let's be honest. No negotiation ends up perfectly the way you'd like it. Because if it was the way you liked it, you'd never be in a negotiation in the first place.
So you expect to have one more meeting, do you? So that you'll go back, have some lunch, and then you go back and you have one more go to try and get this decision?
Well, actually, I'm going to have some breakfast. So we'll go back, and we've got a few hours to go, but we hope to complete it.
Few hours to go. It's pretty clear that it looks like Winston Peters may have blown his third deadline on these negotiations, which have been going for 12 days or so now. He said he would have a decision by the afternoon. I think you could argue that that may well have been broken now. But look, I think what's going on here is brinkmanship. He is taking this right to the wire because he is trying to push both sides as far as he can. We know there was a leak, reports from the NBR suggesting that National had pushed back against extra ministerial positions. Also reports too that Winston Peters had been cited heading up a back way through to the Labour Party offices. So as I say, lots of rumours, lots of reports and leaks floating around, but not much certainty. We will stay with you right through the news hour because this does look like it will happen at some point over the next hour.
OK, we'll talk to you again very soon. Thanks, Corin. Well, to political reporter Andrea Vance now, who's been following Bill English and the National Party. Andrea, what have you heard from the National camp today?
Well, Wendy, of course, a very anxious wait for Bill English and the rest of the National Caucus today here at Parliament, like for the rest of the country. We did have a chance to talk briefly with Bill English this morning. He was on his way into a caucus meeting this morning to get his MPs and the National Party board to sign off on the deal that they had agreed with Winston Peters. He wasn't giving much away about what was in that deal, but I'm told that that National were quietly confident that he would still be Prime Minister this evening. He did say that those negotiations could go right down to the wire and there was potential for some tweaks, and we understand, of course, that that has been going on today. Here's a little of what he had to say this morning.
We've had a period of intensive negotiation, and I'm satisfied that the agreements that we've reached with New Zealand First would be able to form the basis of a strong and cohesive government.
Of course, we did ask Bill English how the situation would be communicated to him today, and he was this morning he was unclear about how he would be informed by Winston Peters, whether he would be told before the negotiation, before Winston Peters came here and made his announcement this evening, and it's the same is true for Labour. We're not actually sure how Winston Peters is going to communicate his decision to National and to Labour. All right, thanks, Andrea.
Well, across what's happening in the Labour camp, political reporter Katie Bradford joins us now. Katie, Labour's also been meeting today, but no word yet from Jacinda Ardern. Katie, can you hear us?
No, in fact, Labour has been very quiet today. One thing I do know, though, is that the Green Party, their delegates, will be having a 4-hour conference call tonight. Yes, can you hear me okay there? So one thing I do know is that the Greens will be having a 4-hour conference call tonight to discuss policy and plans. I've spoken to a couple of people who will be in on that meeting, and they say they don't know much about what it's going to be about, but of course we have known that the Greens are going to have to sign off on any deal with Labour and New Zealand First. Labour, I do know they had their conference call earlier in the day in which they discussed the proposal that had been put to them from New Zealand First, and people have been going in and out of that office all day. New Zealand First staffers up to those Labour floors on and off all day as well. And I am, of course, right here where the New Zealand First officers are. Media have been waiting for a couple of hours now, expecting Winston Peters or his staff or some kind of news for him to come out. We will be here throughout the hour waiting for him should he emerge.
All right, Katie, thanks very much. Let's go back to Corin now. Still no sign of Winston Peters, Corin?
No, and I'm told by sources at New Zealand First that he's still in a meeting room with the door shut, but that the expectation is that he will be heading over here to the Beehive Theatrette at some time in the next hour or so. But look, I think the fact is things look like they have unravelled a bit on these talks. This was supposed to have been done now. Winston Peters set a deadline, a clear deadline for the country that he would be announcing this afternoon, and that deadline looks to be passing, and you have to start asking the question now, what has gone wrong? Who's pushing back? Who's I guess, giving in? Where is the pressure point in this? And I think you'd have to say things are starting to unravel a bit. He needs to get on top of this pretty quickly. Yeah, Corin, thanks very much for that. And what is a movable feast. Our political team will stay right across developments, and we will cross live to Winston Peters as soon as he makes an announcement.
To other news and the
Welcome back. Still no sign of Winston Peters. He is expected to make an announcement on a coalition sometime soon. For the very latest, let's go back to political editor Corin Dan at Parliament. Corin.
Yeah, quite some atmosphere here. There are media staked all over Parliament. We have had an advisory, a media advisory from New Zealand First confirming that New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters will make an announcement shortly. So that has firmed up a little bit. There are media already waiting in that Beehive Theatrette. So it is going to be any minute now, and we will of course bring that to you as soon as it comes. There is no indication of which way he is going. Lots of rumours, lots of a few leaks, lots of reports today that suggest perhaps he's going with Labour. We've got the Greens getting ready to potentially be on standby to give their approval to anything, but nothing confirmed. And I've in fact talked to both sides recently, and none of them have any indication of what is happening. So we are literally waiting for Winston Peters to stand by. He should be through in a couple of minutes, hopefully.
All right, Corin, thanks for that. We'll come back to you as soon as you hear anything.
For Chelsea against Roma.
Andrew, thank you very much. We're going to have to break in now. Winston Peters is about to front at Parliament. Let's go to political editor Corin Dan. Corin.
Yeah, we're told by his media staff that he has finished that meeting that he was in and that he is, quote, on his way. So we would expect to see him here passing behind me, not too far away, and delivering that decision. So, of course, it's been a long wait since the election, a long wait since those special votes came in on the 7th, with around 12 days of negotiation, still nowhere near as long as in 1996. But you'd have to say it has been pretty similar in terms of the brinkmanship that we've seen today, really taking this one right to the wire. As I say, I've been in contact with both Labour and National sources tonight. They still claim they don't know which way he is going. There have been leaks that there have been pushback over ministerial positions from National. That's unusual for there to have been a leak, and there's also been reports too that Winston Peters was spotted going up to Labour. It may all count for nothing in the end, because we've seen, as in 1996, that these things, last minute offers can change things. That was the legend from 1996 over the issue of the Treasurer's position, which was one that was put up very, very late in the piece. So we should see Winston Peters here shortly. After that, I would expect for both the leaders, either Labour or National, Jacinda Ardern or Bill English, to be holding press conferences as well. So we could expect to have a pretty busy night here at Parliament, and we'll stay right through as much as we can to try and bring that to you. But for now, we just continue to stand by and wait for Mr. Peters to deliver his speech.
All right, thanks very much for that, Corin. We are going to go back to Andrew. You can continue your sports bulletin, please.
Finish sports news. Winston would like this story too. Horse racing. Relief this afternoon from one of our main Caulfield Cup hopes in Melbourne.
Guy Havelt, One News.
All right, and that is sport, but we do have breaking news now. Winston Peters is about to front at Parliament. Let's go back to political editor Corin Dan.
Yes, Winston Peters just walked past me about 20 seconds ago. He should be making his way to the podium to deliver that decision. He was accompanied by a couple of people. I couldn't quite see who it was. So it's been a long wait this afternoon, but we are finally going to get this decision from him. Will it be Labour? Will it be National? Boy, it's been a long 12 days and certainly a long last day. Let's have a listen to see what he has to say.
Thank you very much for coming along and for being patient and waiting out this event. You may not believe it, but I am truly grateful to you that you've turned up. Let's begin by thanking both the National and Labour parties for the manner in which these negotiations have been conducted and the work that they have put into it. It should be said that during this time, elements of how politics should operate in an MMP environment were seen with great clarity. On 23rd September election day, the effect of over 446,000 votes, or 70% of the total, were not known. We believed on election night that those uncounted votes would have a profound effect on the final outcome. That's why New Zealand First waited until October 7 to find out exactly the numbers we were dealing with and what that meant before beginning negotiations with interested parties and bringing this matter to finality as soon as we could in the most responsible time. We started negotiations the day after, on October 8. We believe that 11 days from start to finish is not too long to wait and stands in stark contrast to the months that it will take the composition of the German government to be known. Germany had an election on the 24th of September, the day after ours. New Zealanders will know the outcome of their election day tonight. The German people will now not know the outcome of their election until December. Now, this is a decision made by New Zealand First, and it's their decision, not that of the leader. Every New Zealand First MP and board member is a witness to that. We consult, and that's been our case and our policy for the last 24 years. Now, personally, I have entered into 2 governmental agreements with Prime Ministers from different parties. We've shaken hands on it, and both those former Prime Ministers have confirmed that as a result of that agreement, I entirely, utterly, totally kept my word. In the last campaign, the Labour Party and the Green Party campaigned as an alternative government. On the question of the numerical construction of that government, New Zealand First was never consulted. But many commentators factored in our support as a given. That enabled the National Party and others in a grouping of 4 parties to claim that they were facing a group of 3 parties, and where New Zealand First was concerned, voters should, to quote them, cut out the middleman, end of quotes. Now, whether people like it or not, the strategies of both those alternatives failed. That is why we are in the position we are in now. That said, the decision that is about to be announced does not represent just over 7% of the vote, or 70%, or dare I say it, 45%. This decision represents the majority in an MMP environment, in an MMP parliament. The government I was first a member of, for example, had under 40% of the vote and less than 10,000 than the opposition party got in that election. On the agreement we've reached is a summation of the policies that survived the negotiations. I want to stress that. It is a summation of the policies that survived the negotiations. As the song goes, you can't always get what you want. Our negotiations have taken place against a backdrop of changing international and internal economic circumstances which we cannot ignore. We in New Zealand First believe that an economic correction or a slowdown is looming, and that the first signs are already here. In the housing market slowdown, in Reserve Bank and trading banks' nervousness, in the cessation of hot money from abroad, in property ownership concerns, in receding consumer optimism, and in ebbing retailer confidence. There were great risks in whatever decision we made, and despite our having had no influence on these risks, some will attempt, when the looming dangers come, to heap the blame on us. That those blame caricatures are both spurious and misplaced won't stop attempts to misdescribe the cause of these events. That's why we are putting this scenario out front right now, so that such attempts will fail. Awareness of looming consensus has affected our decision. Our choice today relates to how best we mitigate, not worsen, what is coming, we believe, and its impact on as many New Zealanders as is possible. Now, can I say this? As a party, New Zealand First believes that it has secured major policies to advance the New Zealand economic and social condition. Big or small, all of these policies are important. When we construct the formal agreements summating those matters we have negotiated, these policies will be published. It is not my privilege or responsibility to summarise and announce them today. That will be for someone else. Can I just say, far too many New Zealanders have come to view today's capitalism not as their friend, but as their foe. And they are not all wrong. That is why we believe that capitalism must regain its responsible, its human face. That perception has influenced deeply New Zealand First negotiations. We had a choice to make, whether it was either with National or Labour, for a modified status quo or for change. In our negotiations, both National and Labour were presented with that opportunity, working together, cooperating together for New Zealand. That's why in the end we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Mr. Peters, how many portfolios have you got in this new government?
Well, it's a sizable list, but some are big and some are small, and it's up to the Labour leader to announce those when we've completed all our negotiations.
Do you think the Greens will be signing off on this when we have their meeting with the delegates tonight?
Well, that is not my province either. We entered the negotiations with Labour knowing that they would handle separately the Greens. We were always going to be in a coalition government with one party, not more. And that is an answer that I can't give. It has to be given by somebody else.
Do you believe the experience of Jacinda Ardern is up to the job of being Prime Minister?
Pardon?
Do you believe the experience of Jacinda Ardern is up to being Prime Minister?
Well, we wouldn't have made the decision if we didn't.
What qualities do you believe she'll bring to the job?
Well, I think, amongst other things, she exhibited extraordinary talent in the campaign itself, from a very hopeless position to a position where they are in the office of being the next government today.
Winston Peters, do you think that this government arrangement and the sort of policies that you have can bring about significant change to the economic structure of New Zealand? Was that the difference by the sounds of your speech?
Well, our perception was that the people of this country, regardless of what a lot of people say, did want change. And we've responded to that. And I believe in the affirmative, what you said, is going to happen. That's what we're going to put all our efforts into, to make sure it works, and we get the change that this country believes it needs.
Did you call Jacinda Ardern before coming here?
No.
She found out through your life?
Well, this decision is owed first to the New Zealand people. They are after all the people that put us here. Not politicians, the New Zealand voters.
Mr. Peters, what role will you have in the coalition government? Can you tell us?
Can I tell you? Well, let me just say that any role I've got is in agreement with the Prime Minister if I decided to do it.
You haven't agreed on...
Can you tell us what that was? Sorry. Can you tell us what that...
Well, if I choose to be the Deputy Prime Minister, then that was made clear to me. And if I chose to take certain portfolios, then we would discuss it with the Prime Minister. And I don't want to say which ones those are.
What will this mean to exporters in particular who live in the regions?
Well, I hope it means that we will start returning to an economy that understands we live or die by exporting, that exporting against GDP has been in decline and that we've got to turn it around. Unless we get far more people, far more successfully, businesses and enterprises and individuals offshore bringing money back to the family in New Zealand, then the slide we are currently on will continue.
Will that require a fall in the dollar to achieve, do you think?
Well, if you've got every... Now, I've got to tell you that we have not got the Minister of Finance's job, and it's for him to answer those questions. But if the IMF and every other commentator has been saying, including the head of the Reserve Bank, that our dollar's overvalued, then perhaps the political system should respond to it. And they've been saying it for an awful long time.
Do you expect a change to the Reserve Bank?
Yes, I do.
What issues, Mr Peters,
There we go, a historic moment here at Parliament tonight with Winston Peters announcing he will be going into a coalition government with the Labour Party, meaning Jacinda Ardern is the Prime Minister-elect. Obviously still some details to work out. Winston Peters wasn't saying what the policies were that have been worked out with the Labour Party. He was also not confirming what ministerial role he would take, although suggested perhaps he would be the Deputy Prime Minister. But what was extraordinary from that press conference was that Winston Peters was signalling he wants a change to capitalism. He wants significant change in the way in which the economy is run in New Zealand. And I think it's a fair bet tonight that the New Zealand dollar probably has fallen on this result. It was already wavering at any mention of a Labour New Zealand First coalition. There will be quite some impact from that. So just to recap, it is a Labour New Zealand First coalition government. We'll get the details on the policies that Winston Peters has been able to negotiate. But let's have another listen to Winston Peters.
Not right now. We will have more coming up on 7 Sharp in just a moment. Significant political and economic ramifications from the decision of Winston Peters to elect Labour as his coalition partner would make Jacinda Ardern the second youngest Prime Minister in New Zealand history, the youngest in over 160 years. 7 Sharp will have much more coming up.
And unfortunately, we don't have time for the weather. Let's go straight to 7 Sharp.
Yeah, thanks so much, guys. Yeah, the suspense, it's over. New Zealand no longer waiting for Winston Peters.
That's why, in the end, we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party.
Yes, our new government has just been revealed. We are live to the Beehive for all the reaction.
ASB and 7 Sharp, keeping you one step ahead with the stories that matter.
This evening to you, all of that on the proviso that this thing is still very, very fluid. What you've just seen in the last couple of moments, most extraordinary. It was completely different. If you remember back to the 90s, he was very specific as to what the jobs were, what the policies were, what the concessions were. So we have none of that detail at the moment. What we have is a coalition between New Zealand First, Labour and the Greens. We think. He's Deputy Prime Minister. There is still no confirmation whether the Greens have signed this off. They need a 75% pass rate. What on earth they're still doing with that tonight, and it may go wrong. I don't know. Let's go to Corin Dan, who, as you saw a couple of moments ago, is in the Beehive. Just can we get some of the detail, Corin, on what we don't know yet? Do the Greens still need to sign this off or not?
It would appear so, and they had booked a teleconference with their delegates. There was over 150 of them for, I think, around 7 p.m, so I'm guessing that's happening right now. Now, that's a 75% vote they need there. Look, you wouldn't expect there would be a problem. Jacinda Ardern would not be in the position to have put a deal on the table unless she had given Winston Peters the assurances he needed that the Greens were going to back this. So I don't see there being any huge problem in terms of the Greens rubber stamping their end of this deal. I think they will be, given from where they've come from, they will be where they will have some real power.
Well, when you say that, we still don't know for sure whether they're in Cabinet, how many of them are in Cabinet, how many of New Zealand First are in Cabinet, and how that whole thing's made up, do we?
No, we don't, and it's quite extraordinary, as you say, that Winston Peters isn't telling us that. Jacinda Ardern is going to hold a press conference tonight, that is my understanding. I'm sure she will. There are so many unanswered questions still about this, and clearly Winston Peters is leaving those to her, and that will be around the ministerial positions. How many of those New Zealand First has got? I would have to guess that you would think that they were in the region of around 4, possibly more. Whether they're inside, outside cabinet is unclear. You've got to think economic development is right up there. Certainly I wouldn't think finance. In fact, I do recall he ruled that out. So it won't be a New Zealand First Minister of Finance, but certainly you'd expect some pretty powerful positions there. But I just think it was an extraordinary press conference from Winston Peters and really signalling that he wants that economic change that he's been fighting against, I suppose, for 25, 30 years now, since 1984. And this really does look like it's his legacy to try and make that change.
What we had, interestingly enough, sorry, we're going to Winston Peters. Here's Winston Peters.
I think any forward forecast would see that, and Treasury's been announcing that for a long time, except it's never come to fruition. They've been saying it ad infinitum, maybe as a palliative to those of us who are concerned about it. But we mean to ensure that we have a much more accurate and certain immigration stream of skills and excellence and genuine export education. I think the Prime Minister could say more about that, but that's the two things, those are two things we agreed upon, and that should have a profound effect on change. I don't think it's going to have any concern for the people out in parts of New Zealand who desperately need the skilled workers, but it's the massive number that were coming who are not skilled that concerned us.
Were the votes in your caucus, Mr Peters, were they, the caucus and the board, were they unanimous?
Not quite.
OK, well, we'll continue to monitor what Mr Peters is telling us, but it appears very little at the moment. This is a most extraordinary situation. Let me come back to you, Corin, because, and we'll go back to the day. Do you think that business with the lunch, the delay you were suggesting in the news, something went wrong there, this really was a last-minute negotiation, or he's been playing us for most of the day?
Look, I think he's the great Brinkman, isn't he? And his ability to force extra concessions out of these parties will be the untold story that people will be trying to work out just how much. Look, there was a leak late this evening that appeared to suggest that National was pushing back against a push for more ministerial positions. Now, some interpreted that as perhaps a leak from National. Who knows? I'm not saying that it was, but that it was a sign that they perhaps are positioning themselves to say, we just couldn't give Winston what he wanted. We weren't prepared to go that far. So that may be where it was going.
So what I've also heard is that he could have 4 in cabinet. New Zealand First, this is 4 in cabinet, 1 outside. That's 5 cabinet positions from a party of 9 people. Labor will need to explain how come they've given up so much, won't they?
Well, they will. They'll certainly also have a very tricky job of, of governing. It's not going to be easy. But look, it was a negotiation. They obviously felt that that was what they were prepared to offer, and it was the chance to be in government after 9 years of opposition. Look, I think it's fair to say too that there were perhaps more policy similarities between Labor and New Zealand First. It would have been slightly easier for Labor to give ground, for example, on the Reserve Bank Act, one of those pillars which Winston Peters wants to, I guess, have a go at in terms of his concerns about the excesses of capitalism. Now, the Labor Party had a similar policy to an extent in that they wanted changes. They wanted it to reflect employment, exporters a little bit more. So it was going to be a bit easier on policy than National, so that would have made that job easier. As for those ministerial positions, well, I guess, as you say, it was just something that Labor was decided was worth it to get into power.
You could argue, Corin, I think, to be fair, couldn't you, that either decision, either way tonight would have made sense. But the policy thing, when you look at Labor, I mean, what he gave away the other day in the negotiation talks is he talked about that dollar, so he's talking the dollar down for exporters, and he's done this for years, so he's been consistent on that. Labor very tight with New Zealand First on immigration. Presumably, we're going to see some fairly serious cuts to that as well.
Yeah, I think we heard him talking there just before you cut to me about export education. That's one area where I think he's looking to make some moves, but still stressing that he's going to get those skilled workers into New Zealand. But there will be businesses tonight that will be worried about any sort of substantial cut to immigration. I think it's fair to say that the immigration cycle was probably going to be easing off anyway. I thought it was pretty gloomy outlook from Winston Peters tonight. Look, the New Zealand economy, yes, there are a few headwinds out there, but the global economy is actually not looking too bad. The New Zealand economy, yes, it's slowing a little bit, but is running at 2.5% to 3%. He painted a picture of a doomsday situation where, and then tried to say, if there is in fact some sort of a crisis, don't blame us because we're the new government. I mean, it was a very downbeat outlook that was portrayed by him. Now, there are clearly some risks out there. China, there's plenty. But I did think it was pretty interesting that he put such a negative tone on it to start with.
Just very, very quickly, why a coalition, given he's now stuck in something that we know for a fact for the last 20 years has not worked?
Oh, I just think it's going to be a lot easier to manage, and he can. I think he's a lot closer to the decision making. So, just to remind people, in terms of being in that coalition, if he's got ministers inside the cabinet, then there is a thing called cabinet collective responsibility. So, whatever decision that cabinet makes, whether it's one made by a Labour minister or a New Zealand First Minister, they all own it. And I think that's the key here. And he's gone in, you know, the whole hog, effectively. So we're going to see a lot more of Winston Peters. It's not this idea that he sits off to the side and sort of plays a second role. This is going to be a very active Winston Peters because he's going to be in cabinet.
Stay with us, Corin Corrandown, our political editor, as this evening continues to unfold.
We are going to take a very quick break, and right after it, we hope to have the new Prime Minister with you.
Welcome back to the 7 Sharp special. What an afternoon. It's been amazing waiting for this announcement, which came about 20, 25 minutes ago. So it's a New Zealand Labour Party Green coalition. The green aspect of it, apparently, surprisingly, perhaps shockingly, still has to be signed off, although, as you heard from Corin earlier on, that seems to be some sort of fait accompli. With the Labour Party tonight, Katie Bradford. Katie, evening to you. When do we see the new Prime Minister?
I think any minute now. I'm up here on the Labour floors, and I've been able to hear a lot of cheering. I've been able to see people crying, hugging. You can imagine after 9 years in opposition, this result is one they could only have dreamed about until tonight. Now I understand Jacinda Ardern is trying to compose herself right now, speaking with her staff and so forth. Now, as to when she was told by Winston Peters, her staff were unable to tell me how soon before he came out and made that press conference she found out. They're unsure of the timing there, but yeah, as you can imagine, there are a lot of happy people up here on the Labour floors tonight.
So let's work through a few things. I can see Willie Jackson on the phone in the background. Just saw Grant Robertson going into the room behind you. So we don't know when she knew, but there are a couple of leaks out earlier on this afternoon. Apparently there was clapping early on. What do we know about her making the announcement as regards cabinet details, concessions on policy that Winston Peters didn't tell us?
Well, I think my understanding of that was that he was saying it's up to her to give that information, which is something we will be waiting on now. It seemed very unclear about whether he would, whether she's the one or he's the one who will do it. So I think those are some of the issues that are probably being worked through now. Back behind us on those floors where you can see all the staff and so forth running around, really trying to work out how do they handle this. Do they want to release all that information now? I think we probably won't see a lot of that policy detail until tomorrow. You would hope that we would be told tonight who those ministers are and what portfolios and so forth, at least for the New Zealand for the major ministerial roles and so forth. But given that short notice, even we've known that all day these negotiations have been going back and forth, people running around Parliament, coming up and down from both here and the national floor. So it seems like a lot of that has been made right to the last minute. I think the other thing, and I heard you talking about that green aspect there, I understand James Shaw will be holding a press conference as soon as the Labour press conference is finished. I do know there was going to be a conference call earlier, and I think, as you said, that would just be a matter of signing off that agreement that the Labour and Greens already had in place, and that was pretty much ready to go.
So the Greens would be expecting, so we're now into the realm of some speculation, but the Greens would be expecting, I'm assuming, some sort of place in cabinet, which would mean Peters has acquiesced to them being in cabinet. So you've got New Zealand First with 4 or 5, the Greens with maybe a couple, the Labour Party. What a mix, eh?
Yeah, well, you have to wonder how some of the Labour MPs who've been sitting here on the backbenches in opposition for 9 years, waiting for this, waiting to become a minister, how they're now going to feel about being shoved aside if that is the case. Now, the issue is whether the Greens are actually becoming ministers outside cabinet. Obviously, we've seen that in the past for them, given minor roles. Whether they are happy with that, whether they just take the win because they've been so desperate for that Labour-Greens government that they, I guess, take that for the next 3 years and think that things may change after the next election. election.
And of course we have to thank you, Katie. Thank you very much, Katie Bradford, outside of the Labor Party headquarters at the moment. Saw Chris Farfoy there in the background. And so what we now wait for is Jacinda Ardern, something from James Shaw. Bill English, I am told, will probably leave politics as a result of this. We haven't heard from him. And of course we have yet to hear, and here we are, we've got a new government and yet we've got no idea who's in cabinet, we've got no idea what the policies are, no idea what the concessions are or who's given up what, where, when and how. It's a most extraordinary night.
Absolutely. Now, Winston Peters has gone for change, making Jacinda Ardern one of our youngest ever Prime Ministers. Just a few weeks ago, the prospect was unthinkable with Labour languishing in the polls. Political reporter Katie Bradford looks at her dramatic rise to power.
The 1st of August and Jacinda Ardern becomes Labour leader, replacing Andrew Little.
Following Andrew's announcement this morning, I was nominated to be leader of the Labour Party. My nomination was unanimously accepted.
She first entered Parliament as a list MP in 2008.
I, Jacinda Kate Laurel Ardern, solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm...
The now Mount Albert MP paying tribute to her political idol in her maiden speech.
Helen Clark. There are many reasons why I joined the Labour Party, but it was Helen who made me proud to be a member. My generation grew up under leadership Helen, and many don't know how good they had it.
The former Helen Clark staffer has always been close to Grant Robertson. They're always willing to give each other a helping hand, even with a bit of wardrobe advice.
That's not the look we're after?
Oh, it might be. I'm just throwing it out there.
She was made deputy leader only in March. And when Labour dropped to 24% in a One News Colmar Brunton poll just 2 months out from the election, the party moved swiftly to put her in the top spot.
Decent healthcare for all New Zealanders. Yes.
The so-called Jacinda effect helping Labour soar in the polls.
Let's go from here today and run the campaign of our lives. Let's do this.
Chants of "let's do this" heard throughout the country during the election campaign as she was mobbed at universities and shopping malls and became a selfie-taking pro.
Awesome. Big smiles.
The 37-year-old likes to tell the tale of growing up in Morrinsville and returned there shortly after becoming opposition leader.
What do you guys think of the election?
But a stumbling block during the campaign, National's accusations of an $11 billion budget blowout and talk of new taxes made some voters nervous, leaving Labour 10 points behind National on election night. But special votes saw the Labour Greens bloc gain an extra 2 seats, and after 3 weeks of waiting and trailing back and forth across Parliament for meetings with New Zealand First,
fine, thank you very much.
Winston Peters made his decision. So New Zealand now has a Labour-led government after 9 years in the wilderness, and its second youngest Prime Minister ever in Jacinda Ardern. Katie Bradford, One News.
Yeah, an incredible rise. Now, we're about to take a very quick break. We are waiting for Prime Minister-elect Jacinda Ardern to speak. We will bring you that directly after this break.
Did she get... Welcome back on the 7 Sharp special. We'll continue on air until 8 o'clock tonight because the show is still developing in terms of we've yet to hear from the Prime Minister-elect Jacinda Ardern. We expect to do so momentarily. We expect to get some detail on policy and what concessions have been made. Meantime, political editor Corin Dan is back with us. Have we heard, Corin, and one of the talking points during this these negotiations, concessions on seats, this legacy thing that Peters is so big on, and you look to Ron Mark, you look to Shane Jones, Labor would have been less likely, it is argued, to do a deal on that than, say, National. So would you expect something out of that?
I don't think we'll hear anything about that, no. It may be that there was some back-channel discussions about that, but I don't think you'll hear anything about that, certainly for a couple of years. It may be that there was some talk. Look, I think, as you say, I think it would be more relevant for National given the seats they hold in that Northland region where Winston Peters is obviously so keen to see a legacy. Look, I think one of the things we should watch out for will be regional development and Northland and the port issue in Auckland. I'm not sure if that was mentioned in the stand-up from Mr Peters, but that's obviously one issue that he's been very interested in. I'm guessing there'll be some sort of a study around that. What will be one of the most fascinating aspects of this will be just how detailed and how many policy concessions there will be. We know there's going to be some ministerial positions Will there be, for example, a boosted super gold card, was one of the things that Mr Peters obviously wanted. We know there's going to be some immigration cuts. It sounds like while there'll be some reform to the Reserve Bank Act, we're not going to see some radical change to the Singaporean model that Mr Peters had advocated, and that Grant Robertson will be the finance minister. So I wouldn't expect that to have any massive impact. At my understanding, the New Zealand dollar, while it did fall about a cent, has stabilised, and there's nothing too dramatic going on there at this stage. But we clearly need to hear a lot more detail about these policies, and that's where it's really got to go over the next 24 hours.
So as far as what we've heard from Winston Peters tonight that we can confirm is he will be, if he wants to be, Deputy Prime Minister. He referred to the fact that he would have a number of portfolios. What would your estimation of those to be? He wouldn't go back foreign, would he, or would he?
He might. He might. Look, it's something he's had an interest in. I think that the statesman element of the foreign minister's job appeals to him. I'm sure the travel doesn't, but that's just that idea of being on the world stage is something that I'm sure would appeal to Winston Peters. I think economic development portfolio is one to look for, perhaps even an enhanced portfolio that covers, right across forestry, all the sort of employment, immigration, a whole bunch of things, and some sort of Uber ministry that we almost sort of have at the moment with MB as it's known. So look, I think that's one area. It might be Shane Jones, could be Ron Mark that would take that. So I think the other one to look out for too will be Tracy Martin. She's had a strong interest in education. Would she pick up an associate education spokesperson, or would she even be the education minister? It's not impossible to think that that could be something that's on the cards. We'll just have to wait and see. But I think those would be the main names you'd be looking for that might be in cabinet.
On the other side of the equation, we've not talked about this at all tonight. Where's Bill English? What's his future, and is this the end of him?
Oh, I think they're going to be so bitterly disappointed tonight, right up to the last minute. I don't think they knew, and I think it will be. We can't say for sure, but look, he's been in this government for 9 years. He's done all he can do. He got a year almost as Prime Minister. He ran a campaign in which he'll be able to hold his head up high, but in the end didn't get things to go his way when it comes to coalition talks. What will be interesting will be how they I guess, present it. Do they come out and say, look, we just weren't prepared to compromise like the Labour Party was, and really try and push that idea that they just had to hold the line? Look, there'll be some in the National Party, perhaps in the backbenches, some of the new MPs coming through who won't be that disappointed. They probably felt, in terms of their future, that another 3 years, it was, that it was very unlikely that a National Party would have got a fifth term. So they perhaps see 3 years in opposition as not the end of the world. And remember, it'll be a very strong opposition. A lot of MPs, that means they get more money, they get more, I guess, resources to attack the government, and you can expect they will also, of course, know plenty about the ministries and what they're up to, and you can expect they will be very, very tough in opposition. And this, in many respects, Corin, is the really interesting story, isn't it? Once we get this detail, National might be able to present a picture of saying, here's what Winston asked for, here's what we were prepared to do, it was across the line, and there is some credibility, perhaps, to sitting in opposition for 3 years going, enough was enough. I'm sure they'll try and claim that. I'm sure they will. I don't, why would they, stick to some sort of confidentiality around this? That they will feel. I'm sure there will be some, particularly Bill English, Stephen Joyce, the ones that are perhaps, might not stick around. Stephen Joyce might stick around, but they will be feeling a bit bitter and disappointed given their election night result. And they will be, I'm sure, trying to present that argument. But look, it's up to Jacinda Ardern now, isn't it? I mean, this is where the rubber hits the road in terms of her leadership capabilities. She's got to speak to the nation. She's got to reach out to those who will be not liking the fact that Winston Peters has gone with her and with the Greens, and she's got to reassure them that she has got the leadership skills to do that. I think she showed on the campaign that she does, but of course she is untested. But I think, all the pressure is on her now. Appreciate your time, Corin, once again. And, of course, we cannot underestimate what she did for the Labour Party at 24%. Absolutely. And under normal circumstances, you would argue that a leadership change so late in the campaign was a disaster waiting to happen, and yet the reverse, she's Prime Minister-elect tonight.
Absolutely. We'll be going back to Corin again shortly. But first, let's have a listen to what Winston Peters had to say when he announced he had made a coalition deal with the Labour Party.
We had a choice to make, whether it was either with National or Labour, for a modified status quo or for change. In our negotiations, both National and Labour were presented with that opportunity, working together, cooperating together for New Zealand. That's why in the end we chose a coalition government of New Zealand First with the New Zealand Labour Party. Thank you very much. Any questions?
So that was Winston Peters just before 7 o'clock this evening. Let's go to where the Labour Party are huddled now as we speak and have a look at proceedings. Are we going to do that or not? No live pictures. That will be a shame if Jacinda Ardern comes out of the door and goes, hello, ready to speak, but we'll sort that out.
But while we do that, we're going to take a very quick break because we are very much waiting for Jacinda to speak, and we will have that on this 7 Sharp special right after the break.
Welcome back. Here's how I see it so far. It was a most unusual speech by Winston Peters. He painted a picture of doom as for the New Zealand economy and the global economy. Hence, in part, he's gone with the Labour Party. He called it the Labour Party, not the Labour Greens. The Greens, as we understand it at this point, have not signed off this deal, and there is still no sign of Jacinda Ardern. Katie Bradford is with the Labour Party, so to speak. Now, where is the coordination, or am I reading too much into this, Katie? Where is the coordination that Winston Peters says, I've gone with Labour, and the Labour leader appears and said, thank you, Winston, and here's how this government is going to work? Where is that?
I think, as we know, that there's been 2 separate deals or negotiations going on. The Labour Greens one was wrapped up a few days ago. Obviously, the New Zealand First Labour one's been going right up to the last possible minute. They are seen as 2 separate deals, and the Greens, those Green delegates are meeting now to sign off on that deal. You have to think that Labour have thought carefully about how they're going to manage this, how on earth they manage, I guess, 2 separate teams that they've got going on here. Those are, of course, all the questions we'll be asking Jacinda Ardern. We're going to be let in here on the Labour floor into their press conference rooms any minute, but I understand she isn't actually going to speak to media till about 8 o'clock, and I think your questions are one of the reasons for that they're trying to work out just how this deal is going to go. They're perhaps waiting to hear that the Greens have in fact signed off on their part of it.
OK. As far is it presumptive of me to expect the Prime Minister-elect to tell us who's in Cabinet, how many seats there are, what they've given up, what are the policy concessions, that sort of detail, or we're not even going to get that tonight?
I think you might be asking for a bit too much detail there. I don't think she's going to know exactly what every portfolio is, what every minister has and so forth. I think you'd hope she'd be able to say yes or no to Winston Peters being Deputy Prime Minister, which I think is the role we've expected all along him to have. And how many ministers there will be from New Zealand First and possibly how many from the Greens. It seems only fair enough that you would know and expect to know that. In terms of other policy details, there's some big issues, you know, immigration, changes to immigration laws.